Wait for it. Wait for it, and we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blaze podcast. Just a couple of nerdy veterans and one chaos coordinator geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, we're going to let our guests introduce themselves to our listeners and viewers at home. First, we have Madam Chloe Garner, first of her line.
First of my line. My name is Chloe Garner. I love it. Fanfare. Oh, this is going to be a fun one. I am Chloe Garner, writer of science fiction, fantasy, urban fantasy, a little bit of horror, and just about anything else that strikes my fancy at any given time. And I am here for a great evening.
You know, I too write horror stories every April. All right. All right, next we have Miss Jana S Brown. Sometimes she cosplays as Jena Rey and many other personalities we are contractually obligated not to talk about.
No, don't talk about them then, for heaven's sakes. I'm Jana S Brown.
About them. We're not talking about them, though. Right.
So don't talk about the not talking about the not talking about them.
Oh, okay. My bad. I got confused sometimes.
Right. I'm Jana S Brown. I write speculative fiction of all sorts under the pen name Jena Rey. I categorize it as the weird and the wonderful, often with smoochies, because, we got to get our smoochies in there. And I am really happy to be here, too. This is going to be fun.
All right. Next, we have Mr. Jesse James Fain, outlaw author himself.
Hey everyone, I'm Jesse James Fain. I go by the Outlaw Author because the branding writes itself. I am the author of Dead Wolf, Children of Fire, the Rune Red Eagle series, and hopefully a bunch of other stuff that's finally going to see the light of day here soon. And yeah, that's me.
Outstanding. And next, we have Madam Melissa McShane, who is finally back in the continental United States for a brief 5 minutes. Is it true that the teleporter brought all of you through safely this time?
Well, you can only see the upper half of me because the rest of me is stuck in the Kochi airport. Ooh. So, sorry. Yeah.
That's going
bad.
To work.
Yeah, that's pretty bad. Hi, I'm Melissa McShane, and I am the author of many fantasy novels of various types, including contemporary fantasy and historical fantasy. And I am here in the U.S. temporarily on a visit from where I live in India. And I am looking forward to enjoying the company tonight.
All right. And with that, we're going to skip well, you know what? We do have one religion question we're going to ask because we prepped them for a guest who's never been on the show. But technology doing what technology does means that it didn't work. But this episode is going to air in May because we're pre-recording this one. So answer your future self this question, okay? So future you is talking, but what are you drinking this hot summer day? What is your beverage of choice, Madam Chloe?
Definitely ice cold Propel.
Okay. All right. Do you have a special flavor you like?
Is black cherry, which is the hardest to find. And we have done the Kroger, Meyer, Walmart loop looking for it.
Go to
they all
Aldi's,
say that they have it in stock and you show up and it is not there. So at this point we actually have it on subscription out of Amazon.
All right.
No Aldi's to check out? That's where I go when I can't find things. You don't have Aldi's?
We do, but they aren't really known for having anything specific.
Okay, I know that's so localized as how they source things. You can't count on that. I know some people
show up and it's a surprise. It's kind of like Big Lots.
I know some people it's like, no, that's where I go for all the the well-priced meats and fresh fruit and stuff. And other people are like,
no, it's great for that stuff. But if you have one thing of one brand that you're looking for, you don't start opening New Year's crackers looking for your specific toy.
That's true. All right. So, Miss Jana S Brown, what is future Jana or Jena going to be drinking on this hot May day?
Well, Diet Dr. Pepper, because I am always drinking Diet Dr. Pepper. But when we get into springtime, I also really dig a good root beer. something about that says spring and summer to me. Because when we used to do family reunions, there was, and these were really big ones, because I'm an LDS Utah family person, and so our extended family, when we did reunions, was like 100 of us. And so my uncles would make ginormous vats of root beer and cream soda with the dry ice and the smoke and the everything else. And so something about those flavors says spring and summer to me. So if I'm not indulging in my Diet Dr. Pepper, then that's the direction I'm going.
Is it root beer or is it sassafras?
Well, this is root beer. Sassafras is a slightly different thing.
I've had both. I know some people consider them interchangeable.
No,
So,
those people are wrong.
Okay, all right. So, the gauntlet has been thrown.
Going to say that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying, if you want to talk about it in the comments, I'm sure she'll be happy to argue with you.
Feel free. We can fight over it, but typical, modern root beer is not generally made with sassafras root anymore. That's where it began. But the root beer that we drink now is mostly artificial and has a whole lot of caramel in it. And so it has those echoes of sassafras. To drink real sassafras is a much stronger drink, and I do like it very much. But more typical root beer is it doesn't come from the roots anymore.
Oh.
It's forgotten where it came from. That's a shame.
That is sad.
It has. It's very sad.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right, Jesse, save us from ourselves.
It's rootless beer, one might say.
No, it is. It's rootless beer.
So what are you drinking over the summer, Jesse?
So I am. It's got to be cold, whatever it is. If they could produce a machine that would literally bring water or any other drink to the point where it was a 1,000th of a degree from starting the freezing chemical reaction, that's where I would want it. And so it's probably going to be ice water most of the time, but if it's not ice water, it's going to be Sprite Zero.
Okay. I never really got into Sprite. Do you drink ginger ale too? Because I know it's generally if you like Sprite, you don't like ginger ale or vice versa.
So I do drink ginger ale when, I don't know, I'm feeling bad or whatever. For me, it was swapping over to the 0-calorie sodas was a challenge. I was one of those people for many years that it's like, I don't want the 0-calorie version. I'll just won't eat the real thing or drink the real thing as much. And I finally got to the point where I found 2 sodas that actually I thought tasted decent enough for me to be able to make the swap, which was Cherry Coke Zero and Sprite Zero. The citrus flavor covers up that terrible artificial sweetener back end that even Coke Zero has. So that's why I do that.
Okay. And finally, we have Madam Melissa McShane, who will be back in India. So it will be very well.
Right.
No, it actually might be cold in May for you, right?
No, it'll be monsoon season, but it doesn't get really very cold. So it'll be a little more bearable. We'll be out of summer and heading into the monsoon season. So what I drink in that season is a sparkling water that is lemon ginger. And it has real ginger juice and is very strong, very tingly, and not sweetened with aspartame. So it doesn't have that weird, icky aftertaste. And really, you can't taste anything else other than the ginger because it's pretty strong, but I like it that way. And so I'll drink that over ice, which I have an ice maker because most of my Indian friends think that's crazy. And I would rather have the ice than, let them tease me because I like my ice.
So do they drink it just like fridge chilled, or they drink room temperature?
Fridge chilled or room temperature. Yeah, mostly room temperature water. We're unusual because we have a water cooler that actually chills the water, in addition to the water cooler downstairs, which is just the gallon in a little dispenser. And so that's room temperature, and upstairs is cold water. But yeah, it's an ongoing joke between me and the president of the company that my husband works for that I told him once that I missed ice water being in India. And he gave me this look like I had just suggested he eat a puppy because that was just the craziest thing that he had ever heard. And it turns out that he drinks hot water. He brings a thermos of hot water to the office, and he drinks hot water. And so we will tease each other about our different preferences, but
That makes
Right.
my stomach hurt.
Why
Uh-huh.
hot water? I get
hot-
room temperature at least.
Serial killer.
hot water is good for your throat. It's soothing, and that's, at least that's why he drinks it, is because it's good for his throat, and he likes it now, I guess. So
I mean, different strokes for different
Yeah.
folks, I guess.
yeah,
Have you
everybody's
converted
different.
anybody to the ice water?
No, ice water is pretty much a an American people thing. So like we'll go to a restaurant and they will bring us ice cubes or ask if we want ice water, which they do not ask the other Indians. They just ask us because we're foreigners. And so they know that foreigners are weird, and a lot of us like ice water. But we have gotten used to drinking the room temperature water at a restaurant, because that's just easier than making them fetch ice. And it's not, it's not terrible. I just prefer ice water. That's all.
Okay. Whatever works for you, I guess. I
Yeah.
mean,
Sure.
I dig the ice water too, throw the ice cubes in there. But I also will drink it from like an already pre-chilled glass cup.
Oh, mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I get to get a little bit extra for it, and then when I do my iced coffee, I will actually make ice trays of coffee that I freeze. So my ice is frozen coffee. So even when it melts, it doesn't water.
Right. Yeah. I do that with
Explain that out.
Coca-Cola.
Yeah, you can make Coke ice cubes?
Yeah.
It doesn't
I mean-
cause something too weird to happen because you're like
No.
freezing the carbonation?
No,
The
it's just-
carbonation is
just-
gone.
yeah, it just eliminates the carbonation, but
But
you
wouldn't
get
it
the
make it
flavor.
flat and then mess with the flavor?
No. I mean, I don't drink it that slowly, so I don't know. But yeah, it's no different than, like, at least it's flavored water, so it's not like with an ice cube. It's not quite that bad. But yeah, you lose the carbonation. But
I just thought it would give it like a flat taste
no,
if they melted that way.
not really.
We need to bring the Coke scientists on and get them to like run experiments for us.
Yeah.
Tell us.
But like I say, I never let it get down to where it's melted the ice cubes. And I don't do it very often because, why spend good Coca-Cola turning it into ice cubes when you could just drink it? See? That's, so it's a fun experiment, but just drink the Coke. Yeah.
Okay, so we've got our priorities in order.
That's right.
That is absolutely good to know. So we brought everyone on here today because we were going to talk about sidekicks. We had a episode planned that we had to reschedule because Nick's jobs are not very nice. And so I said, well, we've got the free slot, and I've got Chloe, and I've got Melissa and Jana, and we dragged Jesse on. He's actually supposed to be at work, but we kidnapped him. So he's in the basement.
All right.
But yeah, so we're going to record talking about sidekicks because they all thought it would be a lovely topic. So first off, we always start by defining our terms. So what is a sidekick?
Well, I was thinking about this, and I was thinking that there's a difference between a sidekick and a team member. So you have like teams of characters that any one of them could potentially be a main character, but often there's like a main character and then there's all the others. But a sidekick is somebody who's never really going to be the POV or main character, but they're important to support the main character. And usually they're really interesting in themselves. I can think of a couple of books where I was more interested in what was going on with the sidekicks than I was in the main characters, which is probably a problem. But so that's just what I was thinking about this afternoon was the difference between having a sidekick and being a part of a team.
Yeah, it's kind of ensemble cast versus
Right.
having a main character and really supporting characters who they should still have agency. They should still have things that they want, but they tend to have a little bit, they might have less authority, or a lot of their goals are going to revolve around what's going on with the main character. We see him a lot in superhero stories, which I'm sure we'll talk about eventually, as kind of that second person, and often a way to do other things that the main character may not know, or when they need extra hands, and they're fun. And like I said, they usually don't become the main character, the main POV character in that book, but I have seen some great spin-offs that were, this sidekick is so awesome, they needed to have a book of their own, and so they can be a sidekick in one book and then become the main character of their own story.
Yeah.
Go, Chloe.
I would define it slightly differently because I think that you can have an ensemble, which is different from a crew, which is different from a sidekick. An ensemble, everybody is on their own arc and leading their own lives and making their own decisions, and they have some shared reason for being together. A crew all has one central goal and usually a leader who is the main character. But the crew has a lot of interactions and interrelationships that are central to how they react to each other and how the plot works. And that's different from a sidekick who has an individual relationship with the main character. And even if you have multiple sidekicks, they don't have that same sense of this is a community, this is a group with a wide range of dynamic relationships happening. Like I would call Firefly a crew rather than a collection of sidekicks. The sidekick is a unilateral relationship that they don't have a lot going on amongst themselves.
Okay, so would you say that if you're talking about a sidekick, and I like that definition of the sidekick having the relationship with the main character. So if there are multiple sidekicks, does that mean that a sidekick would not have a strong relationship with the other sidekicks, or would it just be that it wouldn't matter?
I think that it's if it exists, it's mostly off the page and irrelevant. The relationship is a one-directional relationship rather than a multifaceted one.
Okay, that's interesting.
I think devotion is a defining characteristic of a sidekick. That being devoted to the main character or the hero or whoever like that in a heavy manner is what kind of triggers that like sidekick relationship. So we see Jana brought up in our side chat like Batman and Robin. Robin is devoted to the cause that Batman is enacting. He's devoted to learning from Batman. My favorite sidekick ever, Samwise, Lord of the Rings. Sam is, in my opinion, the real hero. He does the real work, but he's devoted to Frodo. And, I may not be able to carry the ring, Mr. Frodo, but I can carry you. And I feel like that's an important part of the sidekick, is that the sidekick is devoted to the hero in some kind of way. And sometimes even maybe, cooler or better at a lot of things, but that's the whole purpose. Their purpose is driven in the main character.
Okay. So what's the difference then between just a subordinate and a sidekick? Like, how would you define that? Because you could have the subservient relationship without it being a sidekick, right?
Yeah, I think a sidekick has an interesting story of their own. I mean, subordinate, you might as well call a henchman. And a henchman would be someone who has a relationship with the main character, but doesn't necessarily have any agency of their own. They're strictly there to do what the main character wants. And a sidekick would be someone who has their own desires and goals and things and is interesting, but it's not their story. It's the main character's story.
Where does Alfred fall on that continuum?
I was just thinking about Alfred because Alfred's not really a sidekick in the way that Robin is, but he also doesn't really have his own story. So is that a different version of the sidekick?
I think it is.
I think it might be.
Yeah, well, the mentorship's there. In reverse though, like Alfred helps raise Bruce. He teaches Bruce life lessons, enables him to not go to an orphanage, kind of thing like that.
Yeah.
And honestly, personally, one of my favorite things ever was when people started giving Alfred backstory as a World War II OSS operative, and
Yeah.
Was
had
awesome.
him.
That is my head canon. I'm sticking with Ken.
Yeah.
Alfred is awesome.
Yeah.
But I
So,
think that's also the difference between secondary characters and sidekicks, because that was
Yeah.
the other thing I was thinking of earlier, is that
Mhm.
we very often say, you have primary characters or character who's going to be your main character, your main ensemble or whatever, and then you have secondary characters that they're there to provide different parts of the plot. They're there to provide mentorship, to provide this, that, and the other. And then you have your spear carriers and your tertiary guys who are, there to open the doors and may or may not even get a name. And I think in that secondary layer, and even in the top one, is where we get sidekicks as kind of their own thing. So you can have a lot of, because like Commissioner Gordon, again, is not a sidekick, but he is a very important secondary character to making the Batman mythos and stories work. But he's definitely not a sidekick.
Right.
The way that Robin is. And so I think we have a lot of very important secondary characters that aren't necessarily sidekicks, but sidekicks are, like Jesse says, it's that very tight relationship and that very devoted relationship. But they do have their own agency, because we see the sidekicks go off and do things. But because that devotion, I think in most cases, goes both ways, Batman is going to chase down Robin when he's doing something in a very different way than he is Commissioner Gordon. It's going to be Gordon's a grown-up and he's doing something dumb, and okay, I should go rescue him because I'm the hero. There's a very different relationship there than Robin's doing what?
So can a sidekick also have other roles in the story? So for instance, if you watch the Avatar, The Last Airbender, the cartoon series, you have Uncle Iroh, who's a mentor to Prince Zuko, but he's also devoted to him and follows him around almost like a sidekick. So could he be mentor and sidekick?
That's an interesting question. Well, if Alfred can be a mentor and a sidekick, then yeah, probably.
Well, I think Alfred's an interesting case. I'm sorry, Melissa, go ahead.
No, I was just telling you to go ahead.
I think Alfred's an interesting case because Alfred's not like, this is where we get into the Batman dynamic, and I'm going to try and make this short. We have Batman and we have Bruce Wayne.
Right.
Alfred is not devoted to Batman. Alfred is devoted to Bruce Wayne. And I feel like that's a very important and careful distinction, because Alfred is Bruce's father in every way that counts. Thomas Wayne's dead. He's been dead for 30 years. And Alfred serves as the father figure who is an enabling father figure to let Bruce be Batman. But in the end, we see this constant reoccurring theme with Alfred of, you need food, you need sleep, the city can wait. And I'm not saying he's holding Batman back, but he's making sure that Batman stays grounded in the reality of Bruce Wayne. And I feel like that's an important distinction.
So Robin is Batman's sidekick and Alfred is Bruce Wayne's sidekick.
Yeah, in a way.
Okay. Yeah, I mean,
or just dad.
Yeah, for a given definition of sidekick. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Well, and it doesn't have to be subordinate in the way that Robin is, because there's also that age difference there. And we often see sidekicks that are younger. I'm thinking Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. And he's got Short Round, his little sidekick. And we do see a lot of those examples where the sidekick is obviously, they'll be younger, they'll be less experienced, they'll have that kind of thing. But we also see the best friend ones. So that's your Frodo and Samwise. In a lot of romance, you'll have the hero and heroine of the romances will have best friend, sidekick kind of characters that are often their voice of reason. That it's the, when you've had the big fight with your going to be love interest, it's the sidekicks, the best friends who step in and go either I'll help you hide the body, because the best sidekicks will say that. And also, do you think that maybe you overreacted just a little bit and you should maybe go talk to him? Or so they stand to do a lot of those things, but they're not subordinate in the way that sometimes these younger association is. They're the best friends and they're there to say, I got your back, but also you might be behaving a little irrationally.
I think having the younger sidekick makes it more obvious that they're a sidekick. When you have a dependent of some kind, when they're young, they can't do the things the adult can, and so there's no chance of them ever upstaging the adult in the adult things that the main character does. Now they can upstage them in, being cuter or more interesting, but that's on their own terms. So, yeah, I think there's a distinction in age too, that you have a definite sidekick thing going on that's really obvious when they're younger, but when they're older, then it gets a little more complicated. Is this a sidekick? Is this just a secondary character? What's the definition here?
Yeah, Nightwing, Red Hood, they all
Right.
grow up and
Mhm.
eventually, they become kind
Yeah.
of their own thing.
Yeah.
And I think that this is just like anytime we have a genre argument where it's like, oh, well, what about this one niche thing right
Mhm.
here that like could technically,
Mhm.
could technically be a. But JR asked me the other day about like, well, could Weird West be urban fantasy? And it's like, oh well, like
Sure.
maybe it could be both, like depending on the story that we're talking about. And I think that has to do with the sidekick relationship too. There's going to be things that are going to ride the line.
Yeah.
So I will say, when you talk about romance characters, Jana, you said just a moment ago, you almost are describing a foil, which is a character in literature that serves to prove contrast to the main character more than a sidekick. So is that the role of the sidekick in literature, to be the foil, or is it incidental and not required?
I don't think it's required. I think it can happen.
I think it's a really good fit for a lot
Yeah.
of plot devices, but it's not necessary.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's the sidekick can provide a foil, it can provide a mirror, it can provide somebody for an, as you know, Bob, kind of conversation, so that you're pulling information out. The sidekick is there in a lot of ways. It's often the insert for the reader. Especially when we're talking about characters like Batman, like Sherlock Holmes, like things like that, where you're never going to envision yourself as Sherlock Holmes, but you might envision yourself as Dr. Watson. You might envision yourself as the thing that's one step back, the Archie and Nero Wolfe. A lot of mystery does this with the detective sidekick, because they are much more mortal and much more achievable and relatable to than their detective counterpart. And so they're the ones that we associate with and go, yeah, they're the everyman like us. And then we learn about the detective through them. So they can serve lots of different purposes in order to do the story thing, whether that's foils or information or whatever, and they should. So I think the problem we get with sidekicks is when they're either A, more interesting than the main character, which Melissa brought up, or B, so boring that they're not accomplishing anything. They're just there to be hauled around and to be that. In gaming, it's called the dependent NPC, and they just haul you around and you spend the entire time going, where is a convenient tree that we can stuff them in so we can come back and get them later and they can't get in trouble? And so it's giving them purpose, but also not making them too interesting or too boring.
So that's the thing you see sometimes, where you'll see a lot, especially in a lot of middle sci-fi, the sidekick type character is the comic relief, but you quickly find that those types of characters, while they're fun when they appear on the screen, you couldn't sustain a book with that. I mean, eventually you can't just be one-liners all the time.
You have to develop it more deeply than that, but it's actually a really fruitful structure when you have a central character who is invested in something with scope and significance, and you end up with a plot that can get really draggy and lugubrious and hard to care about because it all matters so much and it's just overwhelming and I'm kind of done with it. And then you have the sidekick who refuses to take it that seriously, even though they know that they need to take it seriously, but because if they do, the hero is going to get lost. And so their job is to always be lighthearted in spirit, which is a comedic relief, but it's not a one-liner shallow comedic relief. It is an intentional and a thoughtful in role that I'm trying to remember. It's a show that I've seen where he knew that his job was to be funny, because if he stopped telling jokes, everyone was going to die because they couldn't make it. And when
The
he had a
comedian?
bad day, everything fell apart. And they looked over at this guy and they're like, oh my gosh, you're the heart of this team, despite the fact that you are really just puddle deep all the time and telling inappropriate jokes in the middle of serious conversations.
Yeah.
And then the day that he had a bad day, it doesn't work anymore because you need that. So I really like comedic relief sidekicks that are aware of that role for them rather than just being stupid.
Yeah.
Well, and if you've got a series, you can also develop that a little differently. So I'm thinking in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Xander is the mortal sidekick who he never gets superpowers or anything else. He's goofy and dumb things happen to him and all that kind of stuff. And through the series, that's his role. It keeps things lighthearted and it provides foils for the romances and that kind of thing. But you have a few episodes that are Xander centric where you see that he's got a little bit more going on than even his friends see. And so it can be an interesting thing in a series because like the Zeppo where Buffy is off fighting in the library and it's once again the apocalypse and nobody knows that he is dealing with these zombie guys who are going to blow everything up. And he's the only one that's aware of this danger. And so the funny guy, the guy that's kind of there as that foil, that bumbling human, actually ends up saving the day. And at the end, absolutely nobody knows it except for the ones who have looked at it. And so it's an interesting role that he has because he is mostly there to bumble around and stumble into things and create funny situations. But he can also be shown to have more to it. But it's still Buffy's story. It's always Buffy's story.
Okay, well, on that note, I will remind you that the security guards at Sunnydale High School, if you don't know, that's where Buffy went to. They need to be fired because they never noticed all the crap happening in that library. I'm just saying.
Right.
They never noticed an odd smell or the scorched earth or the blood that they might have missed because you never get all of it. That's why serial killers get caught.
That's
I'm
right.
just saying, those security guards, fire them. We're going to pause right here, though, for a moment, and we're going to shamelessly shill for the man, which is me today. So,
They were called the Human Marine Corps, but their cause was never humanity's, until the sleeper awoke. A century ago, all but 2 members of Lance Scipio's unit were executed for bringing dishonor to his regiment. Now he wakes into a strange new time and is tasked with whipping into shape the worst squad of misfits in the entire Human Marine Corps. The price of failure? Death. This completed series is set in the worlds of the hit Human Legion series by Tim C. Taylor, now released with a special novelette titled No Marine Left Behind, Freedom Can Be Won. So dive into this debut novel by author J.R. Handley as he takes you on an action-filled sequence of military science fiction glory.
all right. Thank you for sticking with us through that commercial interlude. With that, we're going to get back to talking about super, super awesome sidekicks. So, obviously, everyone knows, which is the joke I was making, that sidekicks are most known for, superhero genre, the capes and the cows, the comic books, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think that they're making a resurgence in other genres now more than they used to be, or have they always been there and we just weren't looking?
I mean, I mentioned Sam earlier. I think sidekicks have always been around. Whether you recognize them or not, and sometimes they ride the line, and sometimes they're a romantic interest, and sometimes there's that funny, is this a sidekick, is this not? And so I don't know if it's a resurgence, but I feel that it's a very common, necessary part of a story. That devotion's really necessary. I was going to say this earlier when we were talking about like the purpose of sidekicks. There's plenty of main characters that no one in their right mind is ever going to follow. There's plenty of main characters that are trying to do something that's just absolutely nuts. Superheroes are one of those characters. And that's why you see it a lot, is that if you weren't completely devoted, if you weren't a true best friend or a true lover or a true mentee or whatever, if you weren't dad like Alfred, if you didn't love this man like a son, you'd never sit through him trying to be a billionaire playboy and the Batman that fights crime in the night. There's most people are not going to hang, and so a big purpose of the sidekick is to be that one person that's there literally no matter what.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm thinking when you said the super or the person nobody would ever want to follow it, I was thinking Halo because everyone around him seems to die, and then you got Avery Johnson, the gunnery sergeant, who sort of served like a sidekick, who has the motivational lines that make you like, oh, okay. So
I mean, or Cortana
yeah,
herself. You know, Cortana's the sidekick that can't be killed unless Chief gets killed because she's in his, helmet in his head.
I don't know. She always struck me as like main character vibes. I mean, she's not the Halo or she's not the Master Chief, but she was so fully actualized. I never pegged that as a sidekick role.
That's fair.
Which I guess is where you define terms because, I think sidekick, I think bit role, but you guys are describing it as something, from the shallow to the deep. It's the devotion, right? So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think you can have a sidekick that's just a bit role, because then the question is, again, why are they here? They need to have something about them that is their own story. And maybe that makes it more interesting. I'm just thinking, what if you have someone who has their own life, their own story, but they're subordinate to this other person for whatever reason? And maybe that makes them more interesting as a sidekick because they aren't just the DNPC, the dependent non-player character. They're somebody, with their own life.
Yeah. No.
And it's something that people pick up when they're not there. I mean, you're asking, is it a resurgence? But I think it's that it becomes just such an expected role that we miss it more when it's not there than when it is. And I think that because one of the complaints I got on one of my early romances was that it was very much focused on the couple. And I had somebody who wrote a review and they said, do these people not have friends and family outside of each other? Where are their ride and dies? Where are those other people? And I thought I'd been really clever with making it very focused and very clear and very central. And it worked for most of my readers, but I had at least one person who pointed out that they were missing a best friend role or some of these other roles. It's like, where is her sister that she calls all the time, or that other person? Because they missed that sense of her having that sidekick role. And it's something that I had to think about. And when I did the next book, I made sure I filled that in. And the same reviewer reached out and she said, now you're doing it right. And so that it was interesting that they had noticed that. And it wasn't about doing the romance right. It was that she felt like having that sidekick, having that ride or die, expanded that character's world and made her better able to associate with them. And that sidekick does that a lot, where they are our extra eyes into what's going on with the main character.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that I would call it a resurgence. I'm not even sure that I see the historical, really, really campy, tropey sidekick role ever really coming back in a major way. Where it used to be that a sidekick was a very one-dimensional character who is there to give us another axis of capability, and the reader insert or the viewer insert to ask the dumb questions and remind us of the backstory, and the Adam West Robin.
Yeah.
Holy hand grenades, Batman.
The absolute tippy top of the super campy sidekick. And we're evolving that role into one that does a lot more stuff and has a lot more agency and a lot more investment in their own story. And it's teasing out, yeah, that's still the same guy. He just is a human being now, in a lot of the same ways that the romantic interest in non-romance plots was a one-dimensional sexy lamp that now has her own agency and her own story, and has to be won through a narrative that actually makes sense and is compelling to who she is. And we expect a lot more of a broader range of characters, to the point that it's hard to tell, is this an entourage, is this a crew, or is that the sidekick? Have I found him? And I like ride or die. I really like that as a litmus test. Is this a ride or die for this relationship? Because if it isn't, it's something else. And that's not wrong. It's just we've evolved to a point where it's not quite so black and white to spot. Yeah, this is the guy that says, "Holy smokes, Batman, did you know?"
There's a shark on your leg. You thought?
I think that the roles that we just mentioned, I think like the best friend and the romance partner can fill those. Especially, like I write action pieces, I read action pieces, and people like Harry never really needed a sidekick. He had people like Karen Murphy, like Harry Dresden is who I'm talking about. I'm sorry, but Harry Dresden had Murphy, and he had I guess Bob's a sidekick technically, but Bob can't help him fight. Bob can't, Bob just is a knowledge resource. But there were so many other characters that could fill the role that now, especially in especially modern action writing, I would say like everybody can pull their weight in combat. It's like making a good Shadowrun team. Even the face needs to be able to use a pistol. If they can't, then they're going to die. And so to expand that beyond in any kind of story that we see now in modern day, we're trying to make multi-dimensional characters that can adopt multiple roles. And just like a buddy cop, different than a sidekick, but it fills the same role.
Okay. But I don't even know that I would consider a buddy cop anywhere near a discussion about sidekicks, because for that dynamic to work, it's almost like both of them have to be main characters.
Yeah.
No, and that's my point. But they're filling it's like I'm not. We talked about that ride or die extreme devotion. That's a character that you can make it make sense. You can have that make sense. A romantic interest, you can have that make sense. So it supersedes the role of a sidekick. I now no longer need a sidekick in the story. I think that's what I was trying to get at.
Okay. Do you think that a sidekick can make unlikable main characters more likable?
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Watson.
Yeah, that's exactly
not a very likable character. Yeah.
Yeah, Archie makes Nero Wolfe much more tolerable, because if you just read Nero Wolfe, he's kind of a pompous pain in the ass. And it's Archie that makes it so that you see through his eyes the things about Nero Wolfe that are admirable, and why his being so smart and that kind of thing, how that all works together. And so you do see that very often, that you have somebody who is less likable and the sidekick makes a difference. I mean, even when we meet Han Solo, I would argue that Chewie is his sidekick, even though I suspect that if we spoke Wookiee, he would probably think it was the other way around.
Yeah.
I'm sure some of that roaring is something that couldn't be printed on modern paper. But we meet Han, and he is so obnoxious right off the top of the bat, and you see through Chewie, there is a softening there, that because he's the one that he'll say, "Oh, we're going to do this," and you can see Chewie rolling his eyes, and you go, "Yep, me too. I would also be rolling my eyes at this moment." But he is so devoted to Han. There's obviously a deep relationship there, and it's like, okay, well, if the walking carpet is willing to follow him into these things and to get in all this trouble with him, maybe I do too. And it's not quite a man and his dog, but there is kind of that feeling of, as long as he can like them, there has to be something likable under there. And then as those layers come back, we like Han more and more. But part of why we like him first is because he does have this sidekick who we obviously want to, again, it's our self-insert.
Yeah. Now, I can think of a couple of stories where the sidekick is the POV character, but is still the sidekick. Like, for example, Big Trouble in Little China. Jack Burton is not the main character of that story, but he's our POV character. He's the sidekick. And there's a young adult series by Rick Yancey called The Monstrumologist, where the narrator is the sidekick for this doctor. And speaking of Sherlock Holmes and Watson, made me remember it, because the Doctor is very much a Sherlock Holmes type of character. He's off-putting, he's brash, he's kind of cruel in some ways. I mean, he's still a good guy, but he's so dedicated to what he's doing that he doesn't really think about other people's needs. And so technically that narrator is the sidekick, because that's the relationship, but it's just a different way of looking at it. So, I mean, I think I said this earlier, that the sidekick is not the main character, and so I'm going to take that back. But I think you could, and I think we are kind of moving toward that definition of, what makes a sidekick, and how do you know that this is a sidekick versus any of the other things. I mean, Madam Chloe, you say crew, I say team, but it's the same thing. And where does that line go, and how much does it matter? Because when we're telling stories, we care about the character interactions. We're not necessarily sitting down and going, well, I'm not going to like this because it's an entourage story, ensemble cast, and I wanted a sidekick story. We're really not. I don't think anybody's going to do that. But it makes it interesting for purposes of discussion, because a sidekick does things that are different from a crew or anything like that.
Well, and I think we're finding you can have sidekicks within it, because we talk about Sam and Frodo, but what's the rest of the party? Because, they all have ideas, they have goals, they have that kind of thing. But I would not say that Aragorn is Frodo's sidekick. That it doesn't. There isn't a sidekick relationship there, but there is with Sam. And same thing when we're talking Star Wars. I think the droids are sidekicks, and sometimes I think that C-3PO is a sidekick to R2-D2. There's an interesting relationship between those two as to who's actually the sidekick there. But they're definitely sidekicks to Luke, because they don't have autonomy to determine their own life. That's not why they're there. They're there because of the way that it moves his story, and they come right out. And Ben Kenobi at one point says, "I've never seen such devotion in a droid." And going back to Jesse's devotion thing. So we do have an ensemble cast there, and I wouldn't call Leia or Hans or Luke, any of them are sidekicks, but we do have sidekicks that are still part of that main crew, but it's all within that bigger story. So we have layers here. We're like onions. Jesse, say something. We haven't let you for a minute.
Oh no, it's fine. I talk too much anyway. One of the things I was going to point out is I can think of an entire era. I say era, but I can think of an era where there were a ton of like heroes that were the idiots, and their sidekicks were but Inspector Gadget, Sherman, and Peabody. Peabody, nobody likes Peabody. Sherman is constantly, Dudley Joe-Wright and Faithful Dog, Don Quixote and Sancho. And I had one more on my list, and now my brain's. But there's a whole list of like, God, this guy's an idiot.
Scooby and Shaggy.
Yeah.
Shaggy's an idiot.
Well, I mean, I kind of feel like they both are, but that's just a personal opinion. But there's a whole, and I just had it again, and now it's gone again. Anyway, there's a whole list of sidekicks that you can list where the hero is useless or stupid or crazy, and the sidekick is constantly just bailing them out of the fire incessantly, or making it where you're interested in the show specifically because of the sidekick.
Right.
Okay. Chloe has been silent today.
No,
Not
she
all
hasn't.
day. No, I'm thinking about other stories where the sidekick is the lead character, because that's sort of my that's my twist on that kind of a story. And I'm looking at Doctor Who going, yeah, that's definitely one where you have a really strong present lead that is everybody's favorite character. There's everybody, you don't forget your first Doctor. I mean, this is a big thing. And yet the main character changes every season and is a sidekick. And it's such an unusual structure that they use for that. But it's because it humanizes a character who is otherwise foreign.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives you this new energy and this naivete to go and ask questions and explore and try stuff, where the older and boring main character wouldn't have anything interesting to do without a sidekick that really isn't in charge of anything, but is the driving energy of the whole story. And it just flips the dynamic in a really fun way.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was thinking too about sidekicks morphing into something else, some other role. And I was thinking of this because to refer to my own writing, I have a contemporary fantasy series where the main character has a best friend, and the best friend is, for the first couple of books, the sidekick. And she's really funny, and she's based on my daughter. And then they have another sort of friend, a woman who starts off as an enemy and gradually becomes a friend. And toward the middle of the series, they're no longer sidekicks; they're all a little triad of friends. So I'm kind of wondering about that, about, does the sidekick, if you keep them around long enough, do they morph into something else within the story?
Well, I think they can, and I think maybe some of it is also agency. Who has the agency to make decisions that move the plot? Because we go back to Sam, and Sam was never going to have the agency to say, "Screw this, we're done, we're going home." Right? His agency was still firmly linked to Frodo's goals. And a lot of times when we tell the best friend story, again, I'm thinking romances. I'm thinking, oh goodness, One for the Money, Stephanie Plum. I can find that.
Janet Ivanovich.
Yeah, and she's got her sidekick, and she remains a sidekick because the story is still about Stephanie, is still about what she wants, and Lulu doesn't have that agency. And I think once they start really developing agency as far as where their place is in the world and in the plot, that's where they start kind of moving, maybe a little bit morphing out of that role. Because even superheroes, we were just talking about when Robin starts to really take on his own agency and his own desires, he becomes Nightwing and is no longer the sidekick to Batman. Now he becomes more of an equal. You can even make that argument with Spider-Man and Iron Man with the way that they've done the MCU, where Spider-Man really starts as a sidekick, but not only when Iron Man dies, but before that, he starts becoming his own agent, and that starts moving him out of that sidekick role into a more main character place.
Yeah.
So there might be some agency that has to do with how that moves.
I wouldn't categorize it as agency, because a good sidekick can have full agency and still be willing to delegate their goals from the hero. I think that it's having their own independent goals, which it's a subtle difference. But an unagented sidekick is one who just thoughtlessly trots along behind, whereas an agented sidekick is Sam, who chooses every morning that this is what we're going to do no matter how much it costs. And I don't want to take that away from him. He just has a goal that he is adopting without any reservation for his own goals. And you're right, a lot of characters grow out of that eventually, and that's just progression. But agency isn't the word that I would use. I think that it's the same concept, just a different choice.
Go ahead.
I think that the agency word's hard because when we think of someone that lacks agency, we often think of someone that lacks capability or intelligence or something like that. But there's, we're going back to Sam. Sam charges into that tower after Frodo's captured with a frying pan and a dream, and lays waste. I mean, just starts stacking orc bodies like it's a weekend sale, and that's kind of the struggle. Is I don't think we have one single word that well defines what this phenomena is.
Ride or die.
No. I'm sticking with ride or die. I love that as the thing.
Yeah.
Because there is the point that
my mind thinks biker women, like the girl that sits on the back of the The 1%ers motorcycles.
Yeah.
Ugh.
So, but yeah, that's a good point. I think, you have a sidekick who is subordinating their own desire to whatever it is their person needs. I mean, Sam had a girl back home and he just wanted to settle down and he wanted to do all these things that had to do with being a hobbit, and he put that aside because that's what Frodo needed.
He went on a quest to get the courage to ask out the girl that liked him anyway.
Yes.
That's what he did.
That's right.
So we've talked a bit about characters can outgrow the role of sidekick. They can mature out of it. Does that mean almost, I kind of feel like that infantilizes the role, like that makes them almost childlike, but we're describing some sidekicks that were adults, like Dr. Watson is an adult in his own right. I wouldn't consider him in that same kind of like, what's he going to do when he grows out of it? Go to the nursing home? I mean, there isn't like it. I don't know that the growing out of it. That something about that phrasing is just bugging me.
Well, I don't think it's growing out of it so much as moving to a different phase of life. I mean,
Evolving.
growing out of it is just it's like when people say, well, I used to like fantasy books, but I've outgrown that. That is what you're talking about. It's infantilizing the earlier stage. And I think people think that in general, not speaking of sidekicks, but just about life, because we like to think that where we end up is better than where we started. We like to think that we have grown. And so I think that's natural, but I think specifically in this discussion, talking about sidekicks changing doesn't necessarily mean that they're outgrowing that role. That just means that they are somebody different. And technically, every character, except the static characters like Sherlock Holmes and Batman, they have to grow. I mean, that's part of what makes them interesting, is the growing. And that, just because you're a sidekick character doesn't mean that you're not learning and developing and changing. And so I don't think that it is a matter of outgrowing. I think it is just a matter of, well, like Chloe said, of evolving.
I'm wondering if I can find an example of a sidekick who evolves into being a sidekick
That's
over the
interesting.
progression of a story, because a lot of the times we set it up with, this is the person who follows around that person, and then they take off. Sometimes I refer to it in my essays as, this is the point where this character got oxygen, and suddenly they breathe and they turn into a person that goes off and does their own thing. But at the beginning, you have to have very limited oxygen, and it's all focused on the main character, because you have to build the main character, you have to build the world, you have to build the main arc, and you can't give every character a fair share of oxygen until much later, and that's when they go and they butterfly. But there have to be examples of sidekicks coming into that role part of the way through, probably multiple seasons into a television show, where that main character suddenly has a character who attaches to them and becomes that sidekick role. I just haven't come up with one.
It happens a lot in martial arts stories.
Yeah.
There's a minor villain that the minor villain thinks they're the biggest, baddest dude, and they're out there and they're leading a gang or they're doing whatever. And then the hero, Ip Man, or is an example of this. The hero comes along and just lays a smack down. And after that dude gets his jaw rocked and realizes, like, oh, I have something that I can learn, that character can often evolve into a sidekick, and then they spend time as a sidekick, and then they evolve into a new secondary character that has learned from that. I can think of some kind of gang boss in 100 different stories that gets beat up by the main character, learns and studies under the main character, becomes a sidekick, does whatever they say, and then near the end of the movie, they go and grab their old boys from the old gang and rescue the hero at the last second, charging in with all their buddies. And so that's basically a genre that happens on a fairly active basis.
And I think there again, time does that, because I'm going back to Buffy. I don't know why I've got Buffy on the brain, but there we go. It's not a bad thing to have on the brain. But Cordelia. So Cordelia Chase is not a sidekick when she first starts. She's not part of the Scooby Gang. She is, in fact, an antagonist and a gigantic pain. She is continually getting in Buffy's way because they're in high school, and that's what girls of that age tend to do to each other.
Yeah.
And then she undergoes a change, and for a while there, she becomes part of the Scooby Gang. She is part of the Sidekicks because she's still devoted to Buffy's cause, even if she says things that are stupid or that are, Cordelia says whatever's on her mind, as we learned in the mind reading episode. But she's still devoted to the cause, and even if she and Buffy are not friendly, they're still ride or die in that she does show up to the fights and does what she needs to do. And she knows that it's all about Buffy. She knows that Buffy is the one who has to save them. So when she's in the Scooby Gang, she is there to play that supportive role and to do those things. And then she moves away from that, where she goes on to Angel. And she's the receptionist and a love interest and a sidekick there to Angel for a while, and then evolves from being a sidekick there into the greater powers, which was a stupid ending for her anyway. I have issues about that. But she does show that evolution of, she doesn't start as a sidekick, but goes through a period of sidekick and then becomes something else. So I think you can do that, but you have to have time to develop some of those. I think so often the sidekick gets developed quickly because we have one movie or we have a short series of books or whatever, and we have to have the time to spread that over. Because Viv is that way in Melissa's books. When you first introduce her, there's just not space in the first book for her to do all those cool things yet, because we're focusing on Helena's journey. But it's as the series goes on, now you have what Chloe said, the oxygen for her to breathe and to take on different roles and do different things, because you've had the space to develop her as a sidekick, and then we can do those other things.
Right.
So we have to have the space for it as well.
Okay. So does anybody else? I mean, I feel like we've kind of hit the head, and we could start walking in circles with every sidekick we can remember, but then it would just get redundant. So does anyone have any closing thoughts or anything to add? It would be, but I do feel like I've actually seen maybe 2 episodes of Buffy, so we probably ought to do an episode where we talk about that IP.
Have you not done Buffy? We need to do Buffy.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, we haven't done Buffy. I've seen the movie. I remember the movie had the best ending ever with the fake death scene and then the principal giving all the dead bodies detention. But I haven't actually seen much of the series.
Very different.
Very, very different. But yeah, Buffy would be a really good IP to talk about. And then how that spins off to Angel, that's probably 2 separate episodes, because Angel does its very own mythos. So they're highly related. They're very, very closely related, but it would be 2 separate episodes to talk about all of it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll add that to the schedule. But as we wrap this up, any closing thoughts? Say, forever speak your piece, or whatever that line is.
Ride or die.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to call the Sidekicks the ride or dies forever. And I have a presentation on Sidekicks that now I'm going to go and adjust that slide, because that's so much more fun.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, this is the part of the interview, dear listener, dear viewer at home, where I remind you to please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right books. They help the right sidekicks find the right main character. People, this is important business. And so with that, I would like you to just go do those things. Write the reviews. If you're reviewing an anthology, since we've been talking about that a little bit, Jesse and I, if you like a specific story even, write that down too, because the authors will love you forever. And with that, we're going to let our guests tell everyone where they can be stalked online. I mean, where they can be followed by their favorite sidekick readers. Chloe.
You can find me at my website, chloegarner.com. It's where I post the long form essays of what I'm up to and what's coming out soon. You can subscribe to my newsletter if you just want to hear when I've got books out and when I've got sales going on. Or you can do the best of all possible things and join my Facebook group, where my fantastic readers hang out and talk, and they're lovely people.
Oh, freaking standing next, we have Miss Jana S Brown, who sometimes cosplays as Jena Rey.
That's going to be the thing forever. I love it. You can find me and the many versions of me, well, at least most of them, over on opalkingdompress.com. You can find a couple of open calls there. I am doing a couple of anthologies this year because it was something that I had not yet done. I've been the back end of anthologies with helping with copy edits and this, that, and the other. And I decided I want a few under my very own editorial names. So those are happening this year. You can find that under the open calls. You can find me on Amazon, on Facebook, on all the places under Jana S Brown or Jena Rey author, or lots of other things, but that's for another podcast.
Now, freaking standing next, we have the outlaw author himself, Mr. Jesse James Fain.
Easiest way to find me is outlawauthor.com. That will have a link that gets you everywhere else. It gets you to X, Instagram, Substack. The Substack is jessejamesfain.substack.com. I really do love my Substack. I think that's where I actually have the character space to make myself be interesting instead of just commenting on everybody else's stuff. As I always tell everyone, feel free to add me on Facebook. That is my personal page. That's going to be guns, tattoos, heavy metal, and a lot more snark than you're probably even used to on the podcast. And yeah, that's where you'll find me.
All right, last but certainly not least, we have Miss Melissa McShane.
All right. Well, my website is melissamcshanewrites.com because even though I own the melissamcshane.com domain, I have not yet switched it over, and someday I will do that. So melissamcshanewrites.com or Night Harbor Press is my storefront. And you can also find me on my Facebook, my readers group, and I have a Discord. And if you'd like, go to my website and you can sign up for my newsletter to get news about new releases and a little bit about my life in India.
Outstanding. And you can find us, dear listener, on our Linktree, linktr.ee, Linktree/Blasters and Blades Podcast. Again, Linktree/Blasters and Blades Podcast, where we link to all the things, the BitChutes, the Rumbles, the YouTubes, the TikToks, the Twitters, the Spotify. We do have our Discord link linked in there now, our Blasters and Blades Facebook group and Facebook page. We have our email, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com for professional purposes only, people. Save the shenanigans from Madam Stabby Stab over there on the Instagram, the Twitter, and the email. You could support the show by going to buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section this for the podcast, and I promise I will keep my co-hosts duly caffeinated. They will drink that coffee brand coffee until it flies out of their ears, people. I don't know how that would feel, but probably not great. So if you want to make that happen and laugh and point, you can go to the link in the show notes. Code Podcast Grunts gets you 10% off. We get a little bit of a kickback. It's a win-win, people. It is an American company. It is not a drop shipping operation. So they actually roast their own beans, which, I'm told is important from coffee drinkers. My palate is so dead. As long as it doesn't kill me, I'll probably enjoy it. But other people with flavor and stuff, they think that's important. And with that, I would like to thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For my crazy co-host, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades Podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. And with that, I'm going to hit the end button. Don't cuss yet, Jesse. Wait for it.